Hi, Saeed.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Am I too early?
Oh, no, it's okay. We like people to come on early just to make sure everything's going to be okay.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to check that.
Yeah, we do have people that are going to be logging on, just FYI. You're not going to see anyone
Is the picture
else.
okay? Let me lower the computer.
No, you look great. Everything is fine. I can see you and hear you.
Lighting is okay?
Yep,
All right. How are things?
things are good. Working from home, DC.
Yeah. Well, you're in the city, huh?
Yeah, I'm in Washington, DC.
Oh, whereabouts?
I am in Woodley Park.
Oh, nice. Nice
Yeah,
area.
we're right by the zoo.
My daughter and her husband live in the city on
Okay.
16th Street,
Okay, very nice.
So yeah, but she's hunkering down, doesn't go anywhere. We haven't seen her in 2 months, so So
Yeah.
that's yeah. And what about your family? Where's your family?
They're in Ohio. That's where I grew up.
Yeah, they're all right.
In
They're
Toledo.
okay.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, they're all good.
Okay. All right. Okay, my dear. I am here. You want to, or do you want to wait until Sam gets on?
Yeah.
Okay, because I just want to know what would be the sequence. How it, it's going on. It will go on from 3 to 4:30, 4 o'clock.
Yeah, till we finish. We have a lot of questions that came in. So
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
So we'll start at 3 if you want to close your camera until Sam gets on, and then we can. Oh, there he is.
Is that okay with you? I can keep it on.
Yeah, you can keep it on. We're just we're already live, and we're just waiting on people to show up. So
okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Sam. I like your background.
Thank you.
Hi, Sam. A nice
Hi.
background. Yes, yeah. My background is very plain and dreary. Nothing. How are things today in Ramallah?
Busy with everything going on politically. Things are running kind of crazy.
Yeah. I tell you what, I love that one interview you did with Christiana McBour. It was, I think,
Thank you.
last year. Yeah, it was wonderful. And I love what she saw. I think they showed the industry, Palestinian, the Arab industry, and so on, and other industries. And I often wonder what is happening with the industries today. Whatever little trade and industry there was, it must be hit hard. I listened to
very, very hard.
Prime Minister Steye,
We're still under house stay, so people haven't fully awakened to the amount of damage done. But definitely, there's damage done.
Yeah. I'm sure it is a huge. Yeah. Anyway, good to see you.
Thank you.
And I'm honored to be with you.
I look forward to it. Jeanette, how many people did we have sign up?
We had, mashallah, 120 people.
Oh, that's good.
And then we'll also be, we are live on Facebook. So it started streaming already. So we'll begin in just a few minutes. We'll just wait. We told people it starts at 3.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, great. 100 people, 100 something people. Wow, that's something.
I know some people sent me and said they tried to sign up, but it wasn't taking any more registrations.
Wow.
They can watch it on Facebook Live.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
Yeah,
Is
we
there
cut
a
off
limit?
registration at a certain time, just so I have enough time to send all the emails out.
Of course.
Jeanette, is there a limit as to how many people can sign up for?
Depending on your account, I guess.
I mean, is there a limit on by Zoom? I'm saying.
Yeah, depending on the account that you have.
Yeah.
They have up to 100, 300, 500.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Which is why we do Facebook Live, so that way people who haven't
Catch
signed up
everybody.
can still watch it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll do a brief introduction, and then we will have Saeed, you'll be interviewing Sam, and then at the end, once you guys are done speaking.
Are we going to make a small presentation or a short presentation, or is it going to be
Me?
No, I'm saying the format. What is the format exactly?
It's just going to be you two are going to be having the conversation, and then I can
Are
tell
we
you
going
whatever.
to start with like an opening statement or anything?
Yes,
like
I
that?
will. Yeah, and then you
You
each
would,
can give a
okay.
statement. Yep.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. I'm going to introduce everything, give a little background on a Nakba, and then
Right,
ADC's work, and then we'll jump in.
Okay, great.
And I will monitor the questions that are coming in. There's a
Okay.
lot already,
Okay, great.
plus the ones that were emailed.
I'm sure
so.
there'll be trolls and so on. That's okay.
Yep. Okay. Mhm. Okay, so I think we will begin. I'm just going to set this to record. All right, it's recording. Okay, welcome everyone. Let me see here, hold on, I'm sorry. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jinan. I'm the national organizer for ADC, based here in Washington, DC, and we are so happy to have you all with us today for a very commemorative and important conversation on the anniversary of a Nakba, which is May 15th, tomorrow. We are very lucky to have with us today two wonderful speakers, panelists, and guests of ours, Sam Bahour, who's in Ramallah. You're on mute, so just a FYI. And then Said Erikat, who is in Youngstown.
No, I am in Washington.
Oh, in Washington.
I'm originally from Youngstown.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, lovely town. You know.
Okay, all right. Wonderful. And so just a brief introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to our speakers. And please make sure that you put your comments into either the chat box or the Q&A box. I know a lot of you sent us some questions earlier when you signed up for the webinar, and I sent those to the panelists, and I will be giving those out if they aren't covered. But we all know that a Nakba is a very important day in the history of Palestinians in the country of Palestine. Growing up as a Palestinian American, it was very important for my family to tell us the origins of how we came to be as a people and the struggles that we faced. I think for a lot of Palestinians who are in the diaspora, we all, have learned these things, and is extremely important for us to understand the struggles that we have faced. In 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were exiled from and displaced from their homes, created the largest number of refugees at the time. And we've heard the stories of so many people who have been unable to go back to visit their homeland and their villages and their homes. And this is a conversation that we have every year. And for us, it's a conversation that will never get old. We count the years as they go by, we commemorate them. And for us, it's a way for, the Palestinians and our family and our ancestors to hold on to a piece of this history. And so we thank you all for being with us. And at this point, I'm going to pass it on to our speakers. For a brief introduction, Saeed, we'll start with you, and then Sam, we'll move on to you, and then we can begin the discussion.
Thank you, Janan, and thank you, Sam. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you for all those who are participating. This is, of course, a very important event. It is it's the most important event for us as Palestinians, because 72 years ago, actually the destruction and the dismantlement of our society, the displacement of our people, the destruction of our villages, and the ethnic cleansing of our historic homeland. So there's not a day that goes by, at least for me, and I'm almost certain for most Palestinians, that this event does not come to mind, or is not contemplated, or is not does not impact our daily life. For certain, Palestinians, since not only for the past 72 years, but for over 100 years, 103 years, have been really victims. I mean, in the physical sense, not only the emotional or in the political sense, but also in the physical sense of an idea that evolved into a physical entity that is really no more than a crime in motion. It's a crime that is ongoing at all times. I mean, you can say whatever you want, you can be as politically correct as you want, but the truth of the matter is that Israel is a crime in motion. And what I mean by that is that there's not a moment that goes by, there's not a minute, there's not a day for sure, or an hour that goes by without this Israel committing some sort of a crime against the Palestinian or Palestinian property, against brutalizing Palestinians, in brutalizing Palestinians and so on. So that's how we have to see it. It was really the confluence of, Western colonial ideas, at a time of dying colonialism, to basically, keep this idea going forward and so on. So I don't want to delve too much, on the historical background, because we know it all. There are many things that have, transpired since then. Most recently, of course, I will focus on most recent events, which is the so-called deal of the century, which is basically, has come of late to basically finally, finish the Palestinian issue. Or as ardent Zionists like to say, it is the time to basically surrender. People like Daniel Pipes and many others in the mainstream, actually, not only on the fringe, that it has time for the Palestinian, the time has come for the Palestinians to surrender, accept defeat, and just disappear. I don't know where they would go to, and so on. And so, all the ideas, I think what we have seen with this deal of the century, I say this to the participants and to Sam, of course, and to you. What we have seen basically is a complete dying, the death of the two-state solution, which was no more than an illusion all along. No more than an illusion, I say, because really the idea of Israel and the state of Israel does not accept in any way, shape, or form the idea of another fully sovereign Palestinian state that can exercise sovereignty over its territory, however small that territory is. It cannot, because it will be very difficult for it to justify its very existence. So I think, and I would pose this to Sam, I think that the time has come for all, for all Palestinians, in my view, and definitely for all those who support the justice of the Palestinian cause and support justice for the Palestinians, to really begin in earnest to work for a one-state solution. Surely Israelis and Israeli Jews are not going to, accept the idea and give up their privilege and their rights that they have exercised over the past so many decades. But it really is the only workable solution. Otherwise, conflict will continue to be perpetuated and to go on endlessly. Back to you, Sam. Sam.
Thank you very much. I was asked to introduce myself. I'm Sam Bahour. I'm actually in Al Bire, which is my father's hometown, which is the sister city next to Ramallah. I've been here for 25 years. I'm originally from Youngstown, Ohio, and I relocated to Palestine after the Oslo Accords were signed. I actually came back in a private sector capacity. I was part of the establishment of the Palestine Telecommunications Company, and then went on after that to open a consulting firm here, a management consulting firm, which is what I do today. And in the meantime, I actually was part of creating the Arab Palestinian Shopping Centers, which is a large-scale shopping facility. The first one was in Al-Bire, and now there's, I think, 8 around the country. I put about 70% of my time in work and about 30% of my time in civil society. My wife would say it's the opposite, but I try to convince her otherwise. Because you can't be here in a private sector capacity like you're living in a normal society. This is a political economy par excellence. And if you don't have a political undertaking as part of your work, you fail rather quickly. And that's what happened to a lot of people who came here the same time I did back in the early 90s. And they thought the Oslo Accord ended the occupation. Luckily, I was brought up in a political home and a political community. And I came knowing very well that the occupation had not ended. And this was just another way to address the military occupation. Of course, no one expected it to go as it went. And today we're facing some very, very serious facts on the ground and facts in politics that we have to face. And one thing I'll say before we jump into the questions is we, as bad as Trump is, and he is bad, this is not about Trump. This is about a US-Israeli military occupation of us. It is a joint effort. It always has been a joint effort. Trump came and exposed it in a way which makes it very easy for us to explain today. But this is an effort that has been ongoing ever since 11 minutes after Israel declared its independence, and it hasn't stopped yet. And that's where I think today's commemoration of 72 years needs to be put into context. This is not an event in history. This is a continuum that we're facing until today. And that's why when they coined Trump's efforts the deal of the century, those that say, yes, it's not about the deal of the century coming, it's actually trying to close the century that has passed, starting with the Balfour Declaration and trying to finally get the Palestinians to surrender and close the deal. It's not going to work. It's not working. That doesn't mean damage is not being done. And that's where I think we need to focus.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. My first question to you, I mean, obviously you and I see eye to eye on this issue, but you know, we've seen a lot transpire in the last few years, in the last few months for sure, with the deal of the century. And I agree with you. I think it's the closure of the deal that passed. So I want to ask you, as someone who lives in the Palestinian territory, looking at this, you know, grieving annexation, and looking at this crazy, wild idea of maybe creating some sort of a Bantustan kind of state, you know, and 40% basically, and 40 and what is it, 60% of the 22%. You almost, you know, get lost with the numbers and so on. And then, you know, we hear that about annexation. That Mike Pompeo was just there talking to Netanyahu. I think he was there for his victory lap because they really managed to keep Netanyahu as a prime minister. That's one, but also to greenlight, although not so directly, the annexation, which, you know, adds 28% of the occupied West Bank, the Jordan Valley, 28%. I want to submit to you, you know, that for the life of me, I cannot understand this paralysis by the Palestinian, by the PLO, by the Palestinian Authority, by those and the factions and the political bodies in Palestine and so on. What are they waiting for to basically take some steps to end this nightmare? Thank you.
A couple of things I'd mention. First, I think we see eye to eye on the bigger picture. We may disagree on one specific item that you mentioned in terms of one state and two state. I'll get to that in a second. Pompeo's trip is rather interesting because I actually think it wasn't greenlighting annexation. I think that the stance that the global community, led by Palestinians in this case, have taken ever since this deal of the century was announced until today has bothered the Americans because it is not moving as they had planned. And I think actually Pompeo came to tell Netanyahu, slow down. This is not right yet. The Arab world is not submitting to our demands to go forward with this as we had originally expected at the Bahrain Economic Conference. So I actually think we have some progress in terms of pushing back. And the Europeans, for the first time ever, are talking about sanctions against Israel. I actually didn't think in my lifetime I would see the European Union speak in the words of sanctions. That didn't come out of anywhere. That came out of a lot of civil society efforts. And I think Pompeo and the United States has seen that Netanyahu is trying to make a quick end around them and move his political agenda forward, riding the Trump plan. And the US here is the dog. Let's be very clear who's the tail. The tail is Israel. It always has been, it always will be. Yes, they're influential. Yes, they have a heavy hand in US politics. But when push comes to shove, the US is calling the shots. And if anybody had any doubt about that, in the coalition agreement between Gantz and Netanyahu, they actually put that whatever steps are taken will be done in alliance with the US. That's a very clear indication of who's the boss here. So the boss came, I think, to slow down the process. And I think we shouldn't take too much pride in being able to slow the process because the process is moving. But I think it makes a clear message that we are not totally handicapped. Having said that, to your question, what the Palestinian leadership is doing is a question for me as well. Today, I watched a webinar with the chief negotiator of the PLO. I was very sad after watching that. Everybody's saying that next week there's going to be a grand plan and things that we've never seen before. Sadly, we've heard all of that before. What has to happen, in my opinion, is not a grand plan. What has to happen is a renewal of leadership, a representative leadership. And I don't mean US-style elections. Under military occupation and our people fragmented around the region and around the world, we're not in the best position to create proper elections like we would all like to have. However, we are in a position, and we were there before Oslo for 30 years. The PLO had a governing body, had political parties that were active, and we need to go back to understand the lessons of how we benefited from moving governance forward in this fragmented reality. The last thing I'll say, just back to the original question about one state, two state. This is something we're all thinking through right now. I mean, this is the question of the hour here. I come from a school of thought which says it's not about two states. I actually don't think two states was ever tested for it to be able to fail. What failed is the process to get to two states. I wrote a policy paper a couple of years ago entitled "The Asynchronous Struggles of Rights and Endgame." They're asynchronous, they don't go at the same time. The Oslo process tried to tuck our rights behind an endgame that never ended. And I think the lesson that we learned coming out of Oslo is that we have to detach those two issues. Yes, we have an endgame. It's freedom and independence and statehood. It doesn't need to be statehood with walls. When I think of statehood, I think of UN Partition Plan 181, two states in economic union working together for the benefit of all the people between the river and the sea, but two national identities. If we want to talk about one state, I think we're talking about something which is morally correct, but politically impossible today. Especially, and I link it to your other question about the leadership. If our leadership was young, vibrant, had their act together, ready to go, to take the reins of the moment, to be able to move forward with a new strategy, I would be much more positive in changing the game. We're not there. We are at an elderly leadership that has calcified, does not have a plan forward, has failed to produce after 20 years of bear hugging the Oslo process, and our people are not active internally in internal Palestinian politics to the level to be able to take the reins. So until our internal house is in order, I don't think the game should be changed so easily. Because there's a madman in the White House and because Netanyahu is pressing the accelerator as much as he can, should not make us change our strategic decision for statehood. How we deal with statehood is up to us. Statehood could be followed by confederation, federation, parallel sovereignty. The issue is about national identity and rights. It may take another 20 or 30 years for the end game. The rights game is here and now, and that shouldn't wait for any end game to happen.
Well, very interesting. You know, I was the one that asked Pompeo about annexation. In fact, he responded to me and said, look, this is Israel's right to do so, and so on. I believe that he could have done whatever arm twisting on the phone. He didn't need to travel 16 hours, you know, so he can be there for 7 hours and so on. I'm a State Department guy. I go there. I think it's there's a great deal of symbolism here. I think Pompeo went there because they definitely propped him and put him in, you know, allowed him to win another term by all the stuff they gave him. Jerusalem, you know, closure of the PLO office, you know, cutting off aid to UNRWA, all that stuff. You know, I mean, I don't want to go through the laundry list. They didn't need to do that, but they I think it's payback. Netanyahu wields a great deal of influence with the evangelical base, which is Pompeo's base. I mean, he comes from that base, and they are the ones that put Trump in office. We are going through an election year, and I think that is really fundamental to that. But you know, going back to the element of the one state and two state, there has not, you know, although it's been talked about, you know, there's been some effort, maybe some serious effort back in 1991. I don't think it was, but let's say in the Madrid Conference. But everything thereafter has come really to sort of, you know, just nip at at Palestinian rights, their right to statehood, their right to independence and sovereignty and so on. And what we have seen all throughout that process is not only creeping annexation, but the fact on the ground that you talked about, that in fact render any concept of a two-state in that part in Palestine as completely futile, you know. So I mean, look at the facts today. I mean, let's look at the facts today. We have in Israel the nation-state law, which basically legislates and puts into law, you know, discrimination against Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, you know, more than anything else. So they deny that because they don't want to accept that reality. Today we have more Palestinians between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea than there are Jews. So Israel has failed to gather, you know, or create a Jewish majority state and so on. And I believe to continue with this illusion, you know, and to talk about the states and conflicting sovereignties will only perpetuate the conflict. It's really time to say, look, you know, what is wrong with one man, one vote? It happens everywhere. You know, why must we have, you know, a ethnically, you know, pure or superior entity anywhere in the world? So I want to ask you, if you can convince me, you know, or what are the points that you can convince me with that this solution is still viable?
Where I would start is we have to get into a political discussion and not an absolute justice discussion. An absolute justice discussion does not fit playing politics. And whether we like it or not, we are a political conflict par excellence. So we have to come to terms with the politics of the situation. What are the politics of the situation in the bigger sense? That the Palestinian movement, this is prior to Oslo, adopted international law as the platform that it will use to gain independence and their rights. That platform is a very big pill for Palestinians to swallow. We Palestinians, not me specifically, but the leadership of the Palestinian movement during Arafat's time, took that decision. That is political capital that has been spent. And we cannot spend political capital and think we can collect it anytime we want. Fast forward, when the Oslo process started, what was the first step in Oslo? The first step was the Palestinians, with their hand bent behind their back by the US, recognized politically the state of Israel. I didn't recognize them. The legitimate Palestinian leadership spent that political capital. It didn't work. It didn't reach statehood. Where are we today? First, this issue of one state and two state, to me, is a red herring in the discussion. It takes discussions in coffee shops and in political platforms all over the world. It is a red herring because a one state, two state, three state, 10 state approach is not menu items in a restaurant. You know, if I had a good morning today, I get up and I say, you know, I want two states, we can live together. And if I had a bad night last night, I get up and say, you know what, one state, absolute justice. It doesn't work like that in politics. In politics, there is a political agency that spends political capital. Not each and every one of us are responsible for the decision, but we pay the price for that decision. And until we're able to come together as a movement, internally, Palestinians, from Washington all the way to Sabra and Shatila to Ramallah, and reorganize our political house, then we are the only entity, Palestinians together, that can decide of a reframing of the conflict. Having said that, it took us 40 years to understand the platform of international law. When I was thinking of what picture to put behind me, I picked this one from the Zuhurot website, which is an excellent website if those of you who want to see pictures of a Nakba. But I had to choose between this one or pictures of the tents that were originally created when Palestinians fled to Jordan. If I wanted to say what has been done so far, we went from a dispossessed people on the verge of total collapse to in 2020 having 137 states recognize the state of Palestine, the entire European Union discussing sanctions against the state of Israel 72 years after its existence because it cannot close this file. In playing politics, and I'll end on this note, in playing politics, there are steps that we can take to better our hand. When we recognize the state of Israel in good faith, in goodwill, it was in order to reach a two-state solution negotiated with the Israeli side. That failed. What I think we should be thinking today, and it's a thought process because we haven't gotten there yet, is possibly to think about revoking that recognition. Revoking it not to fall into a one-state setup, which we're not ready for and the Israelis won't accept, but to revoke that recognition to wipe out any kind of thinking on the American side or the global side that things we negotiated for the last 20 years are a starting point moving forward. They are not. There was not a deal in the Oslo process. There was a lot of discussions. What the Americans are trying to do is to say, okay, we reached a specific point in those discussions. So now let's open up the game again and start where we left off. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. When the Americans today are telling us, Biden may think to reopen the PLO office. If I was the PLO, I would respond to the Americans, thank you, but no thank you.
Thank you.
We are no longer interested in opening the PLO office. We are interested in opening an embassy for the state of Palestine if you've come to your senses to recognize the state of Palestine like the majority of the world. The game changes in politics. If we accept two states as an approach, it is an approach. If it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, one by one, allies, and in politics we need allies, allies will start to see that the Palestinians were right. Like you said, the Israelis never had an intention to allow a sovereign Palestinian state to emerge anywhere in historic Palestine. But we can't make that declaration and lose our allies and lose the support that we've gotten so far. We have to do it in a way where we stay committed. If Israel wants to destroy the two-state possibility, let them destroy it. There will come a time where we'll reach a turning point. But while that turning point is in the process, we would do well to be able to unify in a political agency which is renewed, so we're ready to take the responsibilities when we make that statement politically.
I'm going to move on to a couple more issues, but I
Sure.
just want to comment on what you just said. You know, I have covered this whole two-state process for a very, very long time, every little bit of it. And, you know, the biggest fallacy of all is the fact that the Palestinians were ever offered any offer. There is none. I mean, people talk about the great, generous Barak offer. There was actually no such thing, not even a small part of it. The only thing that came maybe close to an offer were the Clinton plans. You know, it was right toward the end of his presidency. It was in January, mid-January of 2001, and it never materialized. It was never pushed forward by the Americans and so on. It was dropped by the incoming administration, the Bush administration, and so on. So I say, you know, when we say the support and the international support and so on, you know, I'm a bit leery of the duplicity of the European Union that has been practiced. They're looking the other way at, you know, products that are being made in illegal settlements and so on. The inability of the world community. And I cover the UN, and I worked for the UN. I worked for the UN for a number of years. I was the United Nations spokesman in Iraq, so I know how the machination works in that regard. I think that the UN, the international community, is completely toothless. It has no capability and no stamina to go forward. I mean, they keep issuing statements and so on, but the inability is disheartening. About, you know, the discarding of international laws and international resolutions, and, you know, just the complete wiping the floor with them. The Israelis do that every time, and Nikki Haley did that, and Kelly now does that, and, you know, and the Israeli ambassador to the UN does that, and so on. So that, you know, and that's one point. The second thing I wanted to say is, I'm not talking about, you know, we go and declare a one-state solution and so on. No, I think we begin a process. I'm saying we sort of unhinge ourselves from the two-state illusion and begin a process to fight for civil rights, human rights, and so on. And I think you will have, if you do this, and if you do it, you know, as you must, you know, with resistance that is, and I'm not calling for violent resistance in any way. I'm calling for Palestinians to really come up and be creative and their ability to resist this horrible, monstrous occupation that has gone on for so long, and be able to, you know, garner the support of the world. And I think we have a great deal of support all throughout the world. I run into it. I mean, I always have, and so on. So but I'm gonna move on to another point. I listened to a panel with the Palestinian Prime Minister Hamid Shtayyeh a couple of days ago with the Middle East Institute, and he, you know, he told everybody that we're coming to, you know, a watershed moment on Saturday, that the Palestinian leadership is going to meet, the Palestinian leadership is going to take, you know, historic measures and historic decisions and so on, and, you know, was ironically asked by Martin Endek, look, you know, you have threatened in the past to dissolve the Palestinian authorities and never really, you know, came through with that threat. So what can you do? So I want to ask you, what do you expect? What are these, you know, watershed moments and events and decisions that the PA is about to take to sort of either cancel, let's say, security coordination agreements or any other agreement?
I don't know, because I'm not privy to their meetings. I don't think anybody is. I think maybe you can probably count on one hand those that are privy, if we can even fill one hand. The decision-making kitchen is very, very, very limited. We've been here before with the talk of some kind of bold move that's going to rock the boat, change the parameters. We'll see. For me, it's not about a statement anymore. Just like we tell the EU, it's not about making a statement anymore. I would tell my own leadership, it's not about making a grand statement of this or that. It's about capacity to act. And capacity to act is the leadership that's required from statement to statement. What happens in the meantime? I don't think we're in a process that a mechanical move is going to make much of a difference. I actually would not call for dismantling the Palestinian Authority. When my children go to school, they're going to school with a Palestinian professor, a Palestinian teacher, Palestinian administrators. When we say we're going to collapse the Palestinian Authority, what we're saying is that we're going to put a general at Beit El, the Israeli military administration, to be responsible for the school in my neighborhood. That's not in our benefit. What is in our benefit is to retool the Palestinian government, the Palestinian Authority, retool that governing body to serve a different agenda, an agenda of resisting this occupation and creating an environment where people can be more steadfast on the ground. We are coming up against a major clash with reality. It's been penting up for the last 20 years. If we're going to use this announcement of annexation to actually take steps forward to resist in a more serious way, number one, it requires more than a statement. And number two, let's not overdo the issue of annexation. This is not the first annexation. Right. Israel took more than it was allocated in Resolution 181 and 47. It took more in 1967 than it was required to based on the armistice lines. In 1980, it annexed Jerusalem. When it created this apartheid wall, it took more land and annexed it. Its settlements have become a reality that is the Americans want us to think that it's a given. Malay Adumim is going to stay there, or Ariel is going to stay there. So Israel has been annexing on a continuous basis. We could pick this one act of annexation that's coming to make it the one that we change the game on. And I would suggest that there is enough momentum in the political atmosphere to use this to be able to rock the boat. But rocking the boat can only be days without organization behind it. So I would be looking more towards not only the statements, but what are the governing entities that are going to be restructured to be able to serve a new agenda moving forward. I actually don't believe this current leadership is able to restructure the political program in a strategic way. They can do some things. They can cancel some agreements. They can lower the security cooperation. Here, piecemeal kinds of acts to show that they're pissed off. That's not changing the political game. Revoking Israel's recognition changes the game in a very serious way. These kinds of issues are heavy political issues that need to be calculated properly. And I think it can't be done at the president's office alone, nor at the prime minister's office alone. We need political parties involved in the discussion. We need all the brains that we have from around the world, from our people, engaged in this discussion. And that was basically the message that I sent to the president in an open letter that I sent back in September, basically saying, enough is enough. Bring our political house together, open the door so that young people can politically organize in political parties to be part of the system. Because if you don't give them a chair at the table, they will turn the entire political table upside down. And I think that's probably more closer to where we are now. The younger generation is not represented. I'm not even represented in this government. So we need to be able to have a more representative body. So when they do take those hard political decisions, they have a constituency that's able to move forward the day after the announcement. So we'll wait and see. But this leadership has bear hugged a peace process that died long ago. And I'm not sure why they keep kissing the dead horse, because it's not going to get up again. The time is now to change paths forward. And that can stay on a two-state solution if that's the goal. But the path forward must change. Again, I detach the end game, which is a political decision, to rights, which are embedded in international law, and we don't have to wait for anybody for us to call for our rights. And that's the complicated reality that we find ourselves in today.
I don't know how much time we have before we move on to the participants to ask their questions, but I would be remiss if I don't ask you about 2 points. One, of course, the reconciliation with Hamas, Musalah al-Wataniyya, and where it is, and what is the future? I mean, could there be Musalah? And second, of course, COVID. I think that the one good thing, at least it's all relative, is the fact that the numbers remain, according to Johns Hopkins, 350 in the West Bank and Gaza with 2 deaths. So, but what could happen, because in the absence of an infrastructure that can handle the situation, what happens and what measures are being taken to ensure that there is no breakout? Thank you.
Good. On the reconciliation side, I believe, this is what are we, 13, 14 years into the division, internal division. I think both sides, Hamas and Fatah, are not interested in serious reconciliation. They both have these fiefdoms, and they're kind of comfortable in that setting. Coming together would be much more difficult for them to interface with their allies abroad, and they have to learn how to introduce pluralism, and that's a hard job. When the US introduced pluralism, it was called a civil war. So up until now, the Palestinians are still talking to each other, trying to reconcile without a civil war. Let's hope that can happen. I, in my open letter to the president, called for him to appoint deputies and then head to Gaza. And to head to Gaza every week himself. It should not be a news story that President Abbas has gone to Gaza, and to engage not only Hamas, but to engage all of the political stakeholders in Gaza, and to keep doing it until we reach some kind of an agreement to bring the political system back together. Our political environment, our ecosystem is not only about Hamas and Fatah, but they are the main leading parties, and we can't ignore that. We need to be able to get these two parties to open up the political system so the other voices can be heard. That doesn't happen by parties who are embedded in power in a more of a autocratic kind of way. So people need to be speaking out, and we need to be speaking out not only on webinars, but we need to be speaking out within our institutional capacity in our communities. So the Palestinian body at large is demanding that these two parties take real steps forward. And I'm involved in something called the Palestine Strategy Group, and we work with Palestinian constituencies around the world. We're about to release next end of this month, something called Palestine 2020, which has been a year and a half effort trying to bring all the voices of Palestinians and lay out steps that could be taken together. Ultimately, the parties themselves that are sitting in power are not going to take the steps necessary to move forward collectively. We, the people, need to act. And although I have a lot of criticism for this leadership and Hamas's leadership, I have to put a little blame on ourselves as well. Because for whatever reasons, whether we're far away or there's vested interest in being a public employee here or whatever, people have fallen into this routine of waiting and seeing, waiting for the next statement, waiting for the next round of negotiations. That no longer will work. Oslo is behind us. What is this leadership going to present to us for the next phase of our work, which has a different pinning? And that pinning has to be based in political representation from across the political spectrum, and not this duopoly, which is tearing our internal fabric apart. Mm-hmm. The Corona issue, I'm following it as everyone else. One thing I would give credit to this current Palestinian government is they acted quickly. We were one of the first countries in the world that acted to stay home and take measures to close down public life. Remember, we're rather well equipped to do that because the Israelis have done it over the years many times. So when you come to my house, you're always going to find a food supply for a couple of weeks because we're always waiting for the Israelis to close us down. So we've been tried and tested in being able to be under curfew. This time it was odd because the Palestinians were putting us in lockdown themselves. But I think it was the right thing to do, and that's what kept the numbers down. The damage done economically is tremendous. And I think because we still are under homestay, we haven't been able to engage fully to understand the damage that has been caused. And this is something that we all need to be looking at because yes, we're under occupation, but we have an economy. It's a battered economy, but it's an economy. And we can't be talking romantically about Palestinians struggling against the occupation and forget that 4.5 million Palestinians have to wake up every morning and go to school and love and get married and buy a car and buy insurance. And all of that requires some kind of economic activity. So we need to be clear that the COVID crisis put a big dent in our ability to give jobs to our people. And that's dangerous here politically, because the Israeli side historically has always created three strategies for Palestinians. One, leave. The best thing that we can do for the Israelis is to leave. I don't think the Israelis hate every single Palestinian. They just don't like Palestinians to be here. I don't think they think too much about my father, what he's doing in Youngstown, Ohio today. So leaving is a strategy. If you don't have a job, you're closer to leaving. Secondly, Israel has always had a strategy of turning the Palestinians violent. Israel begs for violence every single day. When I'm going to work and there's an M16 aiming at me every single day, that's violence. And I think that the Palestinians have done a great job so far in trying to maintain a low amount of violence. I come from Youngstown, Ohio. I'm shocked about the low amount of violence that comes out of Palestine. However, the more people are unemployed, the more they lose hope. And seeing what's coming politically from the US, they lose even more hope. There's a good chance more people will go violent. And that's a strategy we don't want to take. And thirdly, if you don't leave and you don't turn violent, they have another option. Become a day worker in Israel. Come serve the Israeli economy. And at night, go back home and sleep in the West Bank so you don't become a demographic threat to the Israeli society. We in the private sector in Palestine are trying to create a fourth option, which is stay in Palestine, create a family in Palestine, have dignified labor in Palestine. First and foremost, I see that as the ultimate act of resistance before I start talking about profit and business. Keeping Palestinians in Palestine and linking with the broader Palestinian community to help.
Okay, great. To you, Jihan, we're going to ask some questions. You have?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We have
questions.
Yeah, we have plenty of questions that have been coming in. A lot of good comments saying that they appreciate all the information Sam has been sharing. You made a lot of really good points. But let's go to this question. I had someone send this, and it says, what does Israel gain by keeping Gazans in an open air prison, controlling food and materials entering there, as well as severely limiting utility usage, even controlling their fishing rights? I mean, I think I know why they do it, but, you know, and a lot of Palestinians know why they control that. But if you would like to answer that.
In short, I think Israel gains greatly by keeping us divided. It's the old tested divide and conquer approach. And as long as they can create an environment where Gaza is separated from the West Bank, they have physically divided us. And they actually physically divided us long before the siege on Gaza. Gaza has been closed actually before the Oslo process started. Gaza was under some kind of closure. So basically, by keeping the Gazans under this pressure cooker, they keep first and foremost the internal division in the Palestinian community. And they also remove an aspect of the conflict which has a heavy population of Palestinians. And that was the entire, I think, thinking behind Sharon's unilateral disengagement. It was, we're not withdrawing. He didn't even call it a withdrawal. It was a unilateral disengagement. They disengaged from the middle of Gaza and hermetically sealed Gaza. And then they basically identified it as a foreign terrorist entity. And basically by doing that, they cordoned off 3 million Palestinians from the bigger demographic equation. Remember, Israel is drunk on demography. They believe that any kind of Palestinian presence threatens them. Mm-hmm. And one thing I told once an Israeli minister, I went to a talk in Jerusalem when I was allowed to go to Jerusalem. And I asked him, I said, sir, I want you to answer a question. Pretend like the West Bank and the Gaza Strip fall off the end of the earth tomorrow morning. And you're left with the state of Israel. The state of Israel, your statisticians are saying, will have a minority Jewish population in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. What do you do at that point? He didn't blink. He said, Arabs have 22 states, they can go to any of them. Jews have only one state, so we must stay here. So this is a minister representing 20% of his population, telling them if you get to a certain point, leave. Mm-hmm. I would say in the US, imagine if somebody said Hispanics, if you get to a certain number, leave. That's not even a joke in the US anymore, because the US and Israel are so aligned. Both of those kinds of discussions are happening in the public domain. But this is part of keeping the population away from the equation and keeping us divided.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Okay, God, there's so many questions coming in. I'm trying to pick the ones that really haven't been answered in your presentation. Okay, so there's this one about the EU. So do you believe that the EU will impose sanctions on Israel? The EU usually gives lip service, but no action.
Good question. I don't think that the EU will take any dramatic steps. They're great in making, putting out balloons to kind of get a message across, but they have an inability to find a consensus, because it's a consensus-based organization that can break through the old talk of peace process, 2 states, let's negotiate an outcome. However, there's an element in the European Union that's different than the US or elsewhere. The European Union has within its governing system adopted international law. So for the EU, if Israel breaks international law blatantly as it's doing, the EU has a very difficult moment, because they will, if they acquiesce to that, they're actually breaking EU law. And so I think they're in a bind right now, and that's why they're sending out these very bold statements. Israel, don't put us in that position. We don't want to break our own law and then find ourselves incriminating ourselves because we're supporting Israel. Having said that, I go back to what I said earlier. Actions on the ground must take place for changes in politics to happen. In the European countries, starting with Germany, but also France and elsewhere, there needs to be organized entities in the Palestinian domain that are putting pressure on the political system to be able to find change. And we are doing that in a way we've never done before. The last 20 years didn't go to waste. The last 20 years brought the churches closer to the Palestinian understanding of where we are. The last 20 years brought civil society closer to where we are. The last 20 years produced the boycott, divestment, sanction campaign, which has rallied people in every corner of the earth. So there's a lot of momentum that's happening. My message would be that momentum needs to get political. And to get political, like one of my Israeli friends once said, politics is a beautiful, creative, engaging piece of shit. You have to roll up your hands and get your hands dirty. There is no pristine politics in the world that we can just speak in sloganistic terms, in morality, and think politics is going to change. That doesn't mean that we don't have values in our politics. We have clear values in our politics, and they're aligned with international law. But we need to be able to activate those politically. And we have progress. We had the Bernie Sanders campaign. We have the Squad in Congress. We have BDS. We have churches. We have sister cities. We have a lot of tools to engage with, and we have to act soon. And the other side knows this. When Israel, through its lobby, is passing legislations across the US to criminalize anyone who boycotts Israel, they see what's coming. They see a younger generation of Americans seeing the truth for what it is. And I'm a board member of Just Vision, and we're producing a documentary. This is an organization in Washington. We're producing a documentary to show how these cases are infringing on US constitutional rights. So once you start hitting domestic issues in your context, then I think more and more people will come forward and say, wait a second, today this legislation is about Palestine, but it could be me tomorrow. And the more we act from civil society in a political context, not in a sloganeering context, the more the European Union or anyone else, I think will come forward. The hardest nut to crack is the US, of course.
May I just make a quick comment on the European Union? I think they are duplicitous at worst, probably supportive of Israel and so on, and just completely coward at best. I mean, first of all, we have to remember that the 28 countries, I think they're 28 or 26, I don't remember what the count is, they have to agree unanimously on all things, especially sanctions. So all you have to have is just one country that says no. And remember, the foreign minister of the European Union, Joseph Borrell himself, he said that he's against the annexation already. So this, this loud noise and so on that they raise from time to time is really for consumption. It is for their public that have had it probably with their policies, in continuing the brutalization of the Palestinians and so on, with a lot of discontent among political parties and so on that issue. So let's keep that in mind.
I would add one other thing, and this is related to the one state, two state thing we were talking about as well. You're absolutely right. However, in politics, there's a lot of people who are accomplices into what has come after 72 years. I'm a fan of history, so I've read a lot about what went on before the creation of the State of Israel, and I think we have some in-house responsibilities as well. Having said all of that, there is a political moment right now. All of those people who are telling us, like the EU, that the two states is the only way forward, this is the time we put the question to them, are you ready to act in recognizing the state of Palestine? And this gets us closer to revealing their real interests. Any country today that cannot join the 130 some that already recognize the state of Palestine cannot convince us that they're really for a Palestinian state. And over time, as I said, the more that become revealed, the closer we get to a one-state reality in terms of our politics. But we will only do that if we call the political shots at the right time. This is the right time. I actually, in my letter to the president, said, maybe we should start thinking any country that does not recognize the state of Palestine as it's defined in the UN today, maybe should not have a free hand in supporting us. Maybe they should not be present in the occupied territory working with the Palestinian government. If you're not recognizing us, why are we accepting your funds and your agendas? And these are the kinds of structural changes that I think this moment calls for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. There's a question that came from a young Palestinian that I want to share, because obviously, we're seeing in the US that young Palestinians are struggling a lot with their activism, especially with on-campus, free speech limitations when they are anti-Israel. But this one is on the topic of normalization, which a lot of people don't really understand in its context of, organizations that, are pro-Israel, that are anti-Palestine, but frame themselves as Jewish organizations, interfaith organizations. And then you see a lot of people end up working with them, not realizing, what their, mission is or their premises. And as an activist in DC, I can tell you, we get a lot of organizations who reach out to do collaboration work. And, we always research, and I always make sure to check and see what their position is on Palestine. And a lot of them, it's very well hidden in a lot of the information they have on their website and in their projects. So what is your, I guess this young person is saying that they're struggling as a Palestinian dealing with this issue because it comes up so often.
Let me just give a quick comment on that, because I've been following and writing about this issue. Indeed, I mean, Israel has so many tentacles. I mean, the supporters of the occupations and so on have so many different groups and so on, and different faces and different, and they're all lobbies in one way or another. I mean, you look at some of the think tanks that claim to be objective and driven by research and so on, whether it's the WINIP, the Washington Institute, or the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy that was created by the Israeli army, or many on campus or religious groups and so on. Because that's how they, cleverly and are able to garner support and so on for these policies, sometimes without, unbeknownst to those who are really aiding and helping. That's one. There are also laws that are being legislated, and that's really the dangerous stuff. I mean, what the last law that was passed or signed by President Trump, on redefining anti-Semitism and so on and all these things, that is all designed to basically choke any criticism of Israel. That's what we see on campuses. That's what we saw in North Carolina and many other places, universities, that funds were cut off because it was deemed by these organizations and so on that it is too critical of Israel and all that. We see that all over. But I think that what also we see the flip side is that basically there's a great deal of activism that is taking place among students on all campuses of all faiths. There are many progressive Jewish students, if not now, is doing a great job on campuses and making a great achievement. So, right, I mean, the more measures we see that are being legislated, and the more is indicative of their panic in many ways, because the Palestinian justice issue is resonating among the public. We have a society that is becoming larger and larger in terms of its minorities, Hispanics, African Americans, and others, and where there is a great deal of goodwill and support for the Palestinians.
From my side, I mean, I would start by saying that there's something that we need to understand. That this is a long haul struggle, but not everyone that gets engaged will accept to go to the end. And that's okay. And that's okay. I refuse personally to create a litmus test, which is so rigid that anyone that I will work with has to agree to go the whole 100 miles with me. If somebody's willing to go 20 miles with me, that's fine. 30 miles, that's fine. All the way, great. Having said that, there is a reality in the US that we need to be aware of. When I left the US 25 years ago, there was only AIPAC. There was one organization, pro-Israel, and not much else. Today, you have a plethora of organizations, everything from J Street, which is 1 inch away from AIPAC, but maybe one of the most important inches in politics within the Jewish American community that we need to recognize, all the way to Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now, and everything in between. All of those, if they're standing against the occupation, that's enough for me to engage them. And I would say specifically as we work, and I do this personally in my own world as well, I speak to a lot of groups coming through Palestine. The mass majority of them are Jewish American groups. We need to engage head on with the Jewish American community, because first and foremost, there is a lack of education there that is causing these talking points that come out of the Israeli Hasbara world to be repeated like peacocks, just saying things without actually knowing what's behind them. We have to have the patience and the wisdom to be able to work through working with the Jewish American community. How we do that is a different story. There's some organizations that probably don't want to work with. I would imagine the majority of organizations that I just mentioned are worthy to work with because they engage us in different kinds of convictions within the Jewish American community. On my website, you're going to see I just reviewed 2 books. One is by an Israeli, Menachem Klein, a professor, called Lives in Common. And another is a Jewish professor from Canada, who wrote What is Modern Israel, Professor Repkin. These are Jewish or Israeli voices. I left those 2 books, like I left Ilan Pappé's books when I read them a while back, basically saying we can make our entire case using Jewish and Israeli references, but we need to know them. We need to do our homework. And I think there's so many new voices that have come forward, whether they're new historians, whether they have been people who have gone to the documents that were released after 30, 40, 50 years, researched them, came out with research like Ilan Pappé, only to find that the Israeli government said, wait, what did we do? We released the wrong documents, and take those documents and put them back into the confidential world. So there's a lot of voices that we can use to leverage to be able to tell Jewish Americans, folks, You're on the wrong side of history here. Folks, this is not about being a Jewish state. There is nothing Jewish about military occupation. There is nothing Jewish about uprooting trees. There's nothing Jewish about sieging Gaza. There's nothing Jewish about demolishing houses. But to be able to get that conversation going, we have to get out of sloganeering and turning off the discussion before it even starts. So I would engage more and more. And I don't engage in, let's go to Cyprus and go swim and not talk about politics. When you see me with a Jewish American group, I'm talking about our struggle. I'm talking about our cause. I'm educating. I don't have too much respect for those people that would like to go and play golf or play soccer or go swim and kind of put politics aside to show that we're human. I don't need anybody to show that I'm human. Actually, you're dehumanizing me by asking to show that I'm human.
No, and I agree 100%. But unfortunately, we do see that here, a lot of Arab and Muslim student groups on campuses who are doing hummus, you know, and conversation with Jewish groups. And like you said, keeping politics out of it. If they're going to get together, I think that the politics definitely should be there and they should be talking about it, especially since on campuses, a lot of the student groups who are pro-Palestinian tend to be silenced, while the pro-Israeli ones are the ones that are allowed to display their cause. Are you guys okay for a couple more questions on time? Because we're past 4 o'clock, but this is definitely a very popular segment and we have a lot of questions. So in regards to the one-state solution, would most Palestinians accept this and civil rights rather than their own state?
There are two separate things. As I said, our rights are asynchronous to the political endgame.
Right.
Our rights are non-negotiable. Our rights are inalienable. Our rights need to be addressed today. And anyone who tells you, I don't agree with your politics of what it should be, one state or two states, should be asked, do you agree that I have the right to movement? Do you agree that I have the right to water? Do you agree that as an American citizen who happens to be Palestinian, I'm not treated like a Jewish American who comes to Israel? We have to be able to talk in the framework of rights in the here and now, and understand that the other discussion about a political endgame is politics. It's negotiated somehow, some way. And that political issue is not something to be discussed easily in coffee shops. That political discussion needs to be discussed in a political agency, a Palestinian political agency. If the Palestinians decide tomorrow that they want to live on the moon, that's what the political national movement decides collectively, then we each as individuals need to decide, do we want to ally ourselves with this movement or not? Today, the movement, actually before Oslo, decided on a quest for statehood. That's what the movement decided. Until we change that, sorry folks, this is what we got. And I call for changing it. I want to get into a discussion with all three of us and everybody else out there who's Palestinian in a room and say, listen, maybe the time has come that we have a different strategy. Remember, our initial strategy was one democratic state from the river to the sea for Jews, Muslims, and Christians. We politically changed. That doesn't mean that we're stuck there for history. It means that the political agency needs to calculate, are we ready? Is it worth changing? Is changing possible to be implemented? And up until today, I don't see anything other than calling for our rights today, keeping our eye on statehood, maybe to make the case for one state. But today we are aligned with international law. We have 130 some countries who have recognized us. I don't throw all of that behind my back and say, let's spend the next 40 years to think of a new game, how we play it. And the closer that we get to statehood, the more Israel and the US are taking dramatic steps. The dramatic step of annexation, the dramatic step of the Trump plan, which is the US plan, it's not the Trump plan, it's the United States of America plan. When these plans came forward, it's because there is a calculation in the US that the Palestinian National Liberation Movement is getting traction. It is getting traction around the world, at the grassroots level for sure. But even at some different political levels, we are moving in the right direction. We don't have an army to move this army off of our necks, but we are making progress wherever our entities are operating. And that could be diplomacy in the UN, it could be in the EU bureaucracy, or it could be the church around the block. Those progresses that we have made are not to be lost when we don't actually have our ducks in order to define what could be another strategy moving forward, if there is one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just like to
yeah, go ahead, Said.
chime in on this. I think what we have seen over the past, certainly since the Oslo process, since this two-state solution became something that is being touted by the international community and Palestinian leaderships and so on, we have not moved 1 inch toward this, independent statehood that is dignified, independent, sovereign, where people can leave and come back at will. The Israeli occupation is still there. It's far more brutal. In fact, they probably took far more severe measures, let's say in 2000 and on, against the Palestinians with building walls, destruction of property, killing Palestinians, really depleting the value of life for Palestinians. That's what we saw in Gaza with the marches, because they were assassinating these young Palestinians at will, shooting them in the leg, shooting them in the head, and the stomach, and so on. There's no value. So what we have seen is really no indication whatsoever that Israel can live with a two-state solution. On the other hand, we have not put a great deal of effort into the one-state solution. Let's remember, keep in mind that Israel rules over upward of 7 million Palestinians. There are more Palestinians than there are Christian and Muslim than there are Jews between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. So I think it is an idea whose time has come to begin to contemplate and to discuss seriously, not as a slogan, which I agree with you, Sam. I don't think that we ought to be, victims of any slogan. We have to begin a process of thought. Perhaps there is something there. I'm not saying that this solution would come, because what you have is apartheid, and you spoke about Menachem Klein, and I spoke with him. You spoke about him, and I spoke with him one time, and he said, look, if you push the Israelis and you have them choose between equal rights for the Palestinians and apartheid, they will choose apartheid, and they will choose it violently. And I believe that. I don't think that if the Palestinians were to leave tomorrow and go to Jordan, that this conflict would end. It will not end. Israel will continue, because it sees its continued existence only in the non-existence. It's a crazy idea of the Palestinians as a national entity. So keep that in mind whenever you talk about these issues, and perhaps we can launch a serious discussion, because I have not seen until this moment a serious discussion of what this one state would look like, how it would be created, what are the dynamics, and so on. Given all this, my God, not only indoctrination, but in fact, a life that has been determined by not only segregation, but complete and utter racism and separation and violence that has been inflicted on the occupied.
I would note there is serious work being done. There's an organization out there, an NGO, who's working for this one state, one democratic state. I'm all for contemplating.
And the popular level.
Let's not fall on the trap of one state, two state. Those are the two options we have.
Right.
Again, this is politics. Politics, I don't know why they call it a science. Political science should be called an art. There's one state, there's two states, there's three states with Gaza, there's parallel sovereignty, there's confederation, there's federation. The idea is, what's the political agency that will decide? It's not me, it's not you, with all due respect to both of us. The political agency is the prerequisite to have those discussions about what's the end game in a collective political manner. So the NGOs in the academic world can talk about it until they're blue in the face. Until we come together as a political agency and renew our politics internally, we are not positioned to change the game. Nor are we prepared, because this will require a strategic change in how we do business. I honestly think even if we come together, we probably will end up still calling for statehood, because that's what's based in international law, and that's what gives some momentum to other states to ally with us. We don't want to be the American Indian. We don't want to be 100% correct and the last Indian to be buried. We have to understand that we are in a political conflict. We are not in a sloganeering conflict. nor are we in an absolute justice reality. There is no absolute justice in 2020 anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the Palestinians have given tremendous concessions over time. I didn't give it. The Palestinian leadership gave it over the 70s and the 80s and definitely in the 90s. We have to look at those concessions and say, are we prepared to turn the clock back, knowing that history doesn't go backwards? Or do we restructure our tools to be able to use the benefits that we've had so far, like statehood being recognized, and turn it into a reality on the ground? So again, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but if the baby and the bathwater both are bad, then we need to look at that together to see what to do with it.
Okay. That metaphor always makes me laugh, baby in the bathwater.
Yeah,
Just
I mean, I
imagine a
always throw
baby
my
being
bathwater.
thrown out the window. Okay, so here's a question based on the earlier conversation you had when you were talking about the leadership of Palestinian Authority, how the leadership needs to change. We need younger people. We need more people who, you know, have a different outlook. So somebody asked, how do we get rid of this? They said calcified Palestinian leadership. And on the heels of that, another question came in and said, have you yourself ever considered running for president of Palestine?
No. First, how we get rid of it is rolling up our sleeves and doing old-fashioned political work of organizing, mobilizing within a political context. Again, I'm obsessed with the notion of we have to act politically. Today, there is no political system which is operating in Palestine. There's nowhere to go to sign up a political party to be part of the PLO. So the younger generation, when it gets frustrated about anything, whether it's annexation or tuitions at the universities going up, where do they go to articulate their frustration? Downtown. They go have a demonstration.
Right.
Or if it gets heated up, they might take the demonstration to the checkpoint and bring Israel into the debate. There's a place for demonstrations. I've been to many of them in my life. But in the political ecosystem, we need to think in terms of political parties. And that's why what we should be calling for, even more so than reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, is the ability for parties to be constituted and recognized within the PLO system, so collectively we can come together in a representative manner to change the leadership. That's not an easy job. And it's not going to happen by me writing op-eds or me issuing open letters. It happens by us in our local communities mobilizing with like-minded people within our community to start voicing and putting pressure on whoever out there today is claiming to represent us.
Saeed, you wanted to add to that, or?
Well, you know, I mean, the issue with the Palestinian leadership and what have they've done and time to change it and so on. This is really a very old question. This is nothing new, if I understood the question properly. I mean, I remember I'm from the generation that saw the fissures and the differences and so on among PLO factions and within each faction and all of this thing. So this renewal issue is very old. I mean, it's not something new. My issue is not with the age or even the longevity of the current Palestinian leadership. My issue is with the fact that they have become a totally spent force. I listened to Said Erikat. I listened to Mohammed Shtay, who's, by the way, a bit more dynamic than the rest, you know, and has a great deal of substance. But I think this leadership has failed to deliver. I mean, when they sold Oslo and convinced the Palestinians of the Oslo process, they told them, look, we will have a state by May 1999, right? We all remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened. This leadership has not delivered on anything. What they have done really is basically facilitate the occupation. And I don't say this lightly. They have. I mean, returning back, I mean, I'm sure it was great for many Palestinians to go back and be there in their hometowns and villages and businesses and so on. That's wonderful. But in terms of changing the political reality for the Palestinians, no, they have not. You know, this authority has basically been spending money, given to the Palestinians to sustain the occupation, pay for schools, roads, and security. security. I mean, one of the most horrible things is really the security agreement between this authority and the Israelis, because it is one-sided. I've never seen Palestinian security forces go into a settlement to grab someone who had just attacked or killed a Palestinian. No, it's the other way around. If there are kids in the street, that's the one time when the security forces come in and they chase after that and so on. So I'm saying that this leadership has completely run its course. It is unable, I don't see it being able to basically provide anything on any statement they make or any threat. They have just simply not only too weak, but lacking of vision, lacking of the ability to connect with their public. I mean, Sam spoke about how he would like to see Abbas go to Gaza, indeed, and all Palestinians. But you know what, Sam? Abbas doesn't even go to Khalid. He does not go to Hebron. He does not go to Nablus. I don't believe he's been to Nablus. I don't believe he's been to Hebron. So there is that element of not only elitism, but almost non-caring kind of, elitism. I don't expect him that he will ever do that, or any of these of the people in leadership doing that. So when we talk about the leadership, we need to talk about not because we like them or dislike them. That's immaterial. We talk about what are they doing, what have they done to basically accomplish things that they said they want to accomplish. I mean, look at journalists are being targeted and persecuted and so on by the Palestinian Authority. That's on one level. We don't see the opening of let's say, press freedom. We don't see things that have improved for women's rights and so on. We don't see women and so on in positions of power. So this leadership has failed on all accounts. Thank you.
Okay, one last question to close us out. So this is kind of more of general, and I kind of want to end it on a little bit of a promising note. I don't want to say high note, but a promising note. So someone had asked in one of the questions submitted ahead of the webinar, how do we keep our youth engaged that are living in the diaspora on the issue of Palestine when there's so many obstacles nowadays that are interfering in their passion and activism, to talk about Palestine. Here in the US there's Canary Mission, and that unfortunately has caused a lot of students unable to find jobs after graduation or even while working. So a lot of people, I mean, I know growing up I was very lucky. My dad used to take us home to Albira every summer to visit with our grandparents. We were very connected to the issue. We celebrated it a lot. But times have changed, and you're finding a lot of disinterest, especially now among the younger generation, the Generation Z or whatever they call them now. So what is your hope or your advice?
That's a hard one. I mean, I don't envy the kids growing up today in the U.S., Palestinian youth. It's a hard game. It's a hard game, and it's one that I would say it starts at the household, at least my experience. It starts at the household. I mean, if your household is not giving you the basics of your identity, you're not going to find it down the street at the playground. So the home plays a major role. I was lucky growing up in Youngstown, Ohio, that we have an Arab American community center. That's where I spent my life growing up. And so I wasn't only exposed to this from a household, I was also exposed to it from a community center, which had a majority of Palestinians, which gave me a much more broader understanding and a very politicized understanding. And most importantly, in addition to those two, is like you, Janan, my father would bring us here for visits every summer. And I connected to this place. And I connected it to the point where, being politically aware, when the opportunity arose to relocate here, I did. And that wasn't an easy move, not because of not having an ID and so forth. But I think visiting, finding community in your community that can keep you in company, which is teaching you and educating you, and you're able to bounce off of them different issues that you have, and they support you when there's a crisis, and the household. Those three components are the I would say the pillars that hold up the stool. But on the stool itself, you have to do some hard work. We need to read our history. We need to get involved. We need to get uncomfortable. We need to move out of our beloved solidarity circles, and they are very beloved, and widen the circle. We have to be confident enough to engage the Jewish American community without yelling and screaming and sloganeering and creating litmus tests that if you don't fit my mindset, I can't even work with you or talk to you. We need to be comfortable enough to be able to engage in the issue in an intellectual way. We're allowed to get emotional. We're angry. We're pissed off. That's okay. After 72 years, we're allowed to. But also we need to be able to understand that we're working within environments. And the issue is not who's on my side, who's on the other side. The issue is, am I moving a political agenda forward? Some people will go all the way, some people not. But do I have a political agenda that I'm mobilizing around? And I would just link that to the last issue that Said said, which is, regardless of the individuals in the Palestinian leadership, because they're not all bad, 150,000 employees, public employees, the mass majority of those people are good, solid people. They brought us to where we are today in terms of identity. However, what I question is the political leadership's political agenda, political platform. We need to be thinking in terms of platforms, and then we find leadership to move the platforms forward. We're out of this, let's find the right leader and everything will fall into place. That's old school. New school is, what do we want? And let's bring in leadership, collective leadership, hopefully, that can move an agenda forward. And if you don't move it forward, like Oslo after 25 years, it's time to step aside and let others try.
Absolutely.
Let me just add a couple of things on this, Janan, if I may.
Sure.
If we have the time.
Absolutely.
I was born and raised in Abu Dis, which is next to Jerusalem. I grew up in a very political home, so the issue was always with us, But I agree with Sam. I think that Palestinian Americans in particular, I can speak about that, face a very, very difficult task. And sort of owning their identity, being members of the society, and at the same time being active and conscious of such a just cause, and all just causes. In the 70s and 80s, an area that I lived in America during, there were activities. There were a lot of activism and so on, because there were political parties that basically organized the community and organized events for the community and so on. There were all different factions. This ceased to exist with the advent of Oslo. You need a good rallying cry. I'm afraid that Oslo also managed to sort of take away that rallying cry, which Palestinians sort of rallied around and so on. It's a tough task. It begins at home, like Sam said. I have one daughter. She's all grown up today. She's very political and so on. You have to reach out to them. You have to, be polite but unabashed in your pursuit of the justice of your cause. You have to go to campuses and speak. You have to organize. I remember with the student movement in America, those that were opposed to the Vietnam War, of that generation and so on. It's a tough cause. Just causes are very difficult, and you have to pay the price. But first and foremost, it must begin with us. It must begin in the house.
I would mention one last thing to that, if I may. I think it's critical that we tell our youth that it's important to be who you are, first and foremost, and be excelling in who you are. If you're a lawyer, be the best lawyer, and put your mind into your education to produce that kind of person you want to be. The politics is part of our DNA. We're not all politicians, and it turns out politics is a science. It does have its own people who understand how it works and how it operates and spend their life doing it. If you want to be a journalist, be the best journalist. Then bring your politics to your discipline. And the best example I'd like to give very briefly is Jeff Halper, an Israeli-American human rights activist originally from Minnesota, who created the Committee Against House Demolitions. When he wanted to mobilize people for the fishermen in Gaza, what did he do? He got in a plane, hopefully we can do that soon again, And he went to Maine in the US to talk to the Fishermen's Union. I'm a strong believer that our cause needs to be embedded within our own domains. That's where we have a common language. If I'm a teacher, I'm talking about the academic world and I bring Palestine to it. If I'm a doctor, the same. And we can then bring sabbaticals here. When you come to visit, unlike me when I was young, I stayed on my aunt's porch and ate too much, and I have proof to show it. It's important to come today and put your time and effort in your discipline. So come spend 3 or 4 months in an internship in your field here. If you're doing a master's program or a PhD, pick a topic that brings you here. So again, embed your politics in your lifestyle, because this is not a sport. This is not something that we visit every Friday and then we go back to our work on Saturday. It has to become part of our lifestyle in a comforting way, because this is a long haul.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really can't thank you both enough. This has been probably one of the best webinars we've hosted. People are still on and they are still asking questions, and they're saying thank you for the conversation. And we definitely went over time by a half an hour, but it was well worth it. You know, and Nakba for us obviously is, you know, a very important day, but we should be having these conversations year round, you know, with our friends. And like you said, you know, colleagues when you're at work, whether you're, you know, sitting at home with your family. And it starts at home. So I'm hoping that all of you out there who are parents raising your children outside of Palestine are able to have these conversations with them to show them the importance of our struggle and fighting for our rights as Palestinians. So on behalf of ADC, thank you both again. For all of our participants, those who will be watching us live, we want to thank you for the support. Be sure to go to adc.org, support our work by making a donation. We can't do this work without you. And until next time, thank you all so much. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Take care. Take care, Sam.
Bye-bye. Thank you.